Hi, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Beyond the Track. Today's going to be a fun one for me. I think we're going to revisit a lot of history. I have a lot of questions about some things in history, and we're going to have a good time. Simon Cudby joins me today. Simon, what's going on?
Hey, Daniel, how are you today?
I'm doing good. I'm at the stadium. You are at the hotel.
I'm at the hotel across the road from the stadium, yeah. So I went to the pits a bit earlier, and it was a little bit raining off and on, and snapped a few photos, but it was pretty quiet over there today.
How's the residency been for you now? We're getting into this thing. We've had some races. Houston's been, I think it's been pretty awesome. But for you and everything that you do, how's it been?
Well, last year I teamed up with Rich Shepherd and Mike Emery, and we started a company called Align Media. And I wasn't at the last two rounds, so Rich and Mike have been handling all the photo duties for a lot of our clients. You know, we shoot for Racer X, KTM, Husqvarna, Honda. So we have a lot of, and Feld. So we have a lot of stuff on our plate every weekend. And, you know, I try and help on the back end of stuff these days with client relations. I'm still doing a lot of team photo shoots. So November and December were very busy for me. And I came this weekend to help these guys out and, you know, get back to the races for a little bit.
What I guess coming into a season, okay, for you, because there's different parts of the year that have different feels and different vibes. Obviously, the end of the fall there, getting into winter, it's all about those team photo shoots. I mean, that's a high priority. We get into the season, and it's more race coverage and action. I guess just kind of walk me through how you break up those seasons and how you handle your responsibilities and prioritize. Because again, I mean, you work for so many people, but different times require different attention. So I guess let's start off season and just how you kind of prioritize the things that need to be done.
Well, you know, before I hooked up with, again, like Mike Emery and Rich Shepherd, I was going to the races and doing everything by myself. So, you know, I'd show up, I'd shoot for all the clients. And as social media's importance started to grow, I was getting really, you know, I had a lot of stuff on my plate trying to deliver stuff social media wise, deliver stuff immediately after the race. And then now teaming up with Mike and Rich, it's been great. So I've been able to step back a little bit from that, which has been good. But when I was going to the races by myself, you know, by the time the last outdoors happened, I was so cooked, and I wouldn't basically do anything unless something came along for a month or two. I wouldn't do anything. I'd go ride my mountain bike or go on vacation with my wife and kids or whatever. And then sort of beginning of November, you'd start up with the team photo shoots, and they started getting pushed earlier and earlier. Like if a team wasn't really changing sponsors, or they had no major changes on their bikes as far as graphics and gear and all that, we'd end up shooting in the middle of November, which is what we did for KTM and Husqvarna this past year. But usually it's the first 2 weeks of December are just crazy slammed, and then, you know, you sort of try and relax a bit over Christmas, but you always had that sort of first week of January, Anaheim, just hanging over your head. So obviously this year's been a bit different, or very different. So, and then, you know, you're just on the grind. You were on the grind all the time. And like I keep saying about Align Media and Mike and Rich, teaming up with those guys has allowed me to step back a little bit and just come to some races. And that's been helpful for me. You know, I've been doing it for so long that trying to just manage that whole thing by yourself all the time is not sustainable, you know. So I'm happy to be in the position I'm in now.
Is that, I mean, as your profile has grown, your portfolio grows, your responsibilities grow, has this been coming for a while where you needed to kind of do this alignment and make this move? I mean, has this been like maybe a 2 to 5 year thing that you knew was coming, or did it just hit you one day and you're like, I can't do it alone anymore? Where did that happen?
Well, I got to the end of 2016, and, you know, if I actually step back a few years, you know, when I first started, I think my first race was 1996 Orlando Supercross, and I'd met Davey Coombs and, you know, and the guys at Axo and Renthal and that, and I used to shoot a lot of mountain bike stuff for GT Bikes, and they were a big seller of Axo BMX pants and that. So I'm kind of going way back too far, but and gradually over the years, I started going more and more races. Then I connected with Racer X, with Davey Coombs and Eric Johnson and the crew over there, Jason Wygant, and it worked out really well. But back then, this is before social media and all that. So what happened was you go and shoot the race. I'd shoot film mostly, you know, so you'd have a bag of 35mm film that you'd bring back and you get it processed, and then I'd FedEx the slides back to Racer X, and you know, and it was actually quite enjoyable back then because at the end of the race you were done. Whereas these days it's like, okay, now I've got 3 or 4 more hours work after the race to deliver stuff to people immediately, you know. So I ended up, I think 2009 was the first year that I actually went to every round, and at the end of that year I was like, I am never doing that again. That's just not good. But then I actually went 13, 14, 15, 16, and I was doing it by myself. You know, so it's 120 races in a row, and without a break from the races, and it was starting to take its toll. And at that time, Rich Shepherd was shooting, and we sort of struck a deal together to team up a little bit. And then the beginning of 2020, Rich was like, I need help too. So we connected with Mike Emery, and now it's Align Media, the 3 of us working together. And we've had some other people help us. We had Cole Beach, who's a awesome photographer, video guy that I think he shoots for Feld actually at the race tomorrow. So we've used him. We used him at the Outdoor Nationals this year. Rich took some time off. So yeah, it's been really good so far.
So I'm assuming obviously the digital world has made things good and bad. Again, the workload grows because now when the races are done, you got to get stuff out right away. There's no delay. What about the positives though with that, as far as, you know, just increasing the amount of work you can do, different things? It's like a whole new world, right? What are some of the positives that have happened with that change to digital?
Yeah, well, I got to the end of 2003, and digital had been around for a little while by then, but I wasn't quite ready because it's to switch from film to digital. You know, back in the day, like I say, we'd shoot a bag of slide film, 20, 30 rolls of film, and you take it and get it processed, and then you'd have to deal with that. But digital wasn't quite there, and there were some photographers shooting digital, but whenever I saw it printed in the magazines, because again, this is way back there, so the websites weren't so important, and there was no Instagram or Facebook or any social stuff. So back then, the gauge of how good the photos looked was how well the art director at the magazine could process the photo and how it would look once it was printed in the magazine. So, you know, as digital's moved on, you know, I ended 2003, and back then it was, I mean, it's still expensive, but the first digital camera body I bought was a Canon Pro body, and it was $8,000 just for the body. And I'm like, man, that's a big hit, but the quality is so much better than film. And you get, you know, film purists these days that are like, oh, wow, no, film's where it's at. Well, it's not. The quality is just not that good. And now, you know, as social media ramped up, sort of 2013, 2012, 2013, you know, as you say, the deliverables, yeah, everyone wants stuff immediately. And I still shoot for Racer X, but back then I connected my camera to my iPad with a little Wi-Fi device, and you know, guys at Racer X would be back in West Virginia at the bar watching the race, and then Dungey or Villapoto or someone would cross the finish line and do a big whip, and the flames would go off, and 20 seconds later there's the picture on the Racer X Instagram. And they were kind of, they're like, how's that possible? I'm like, just got the system down, you know. So, but as that's progressed, initially, I'm not talking about Racer X, but some other clients, they were like, we just did it as a favor, you know. We're like, hey, we could do this. This is cool. Well, now it's become the main thing, you know. It's really is, people want that stuff throughout the day. So, you know, we'll shoot pit stuff tomorrow and then send some photos, and then we'll shoot the first practices and send some of those photos. So it's always, you always feel like you're on a really tight deadline these days, for sure.
When you talk about being like a purist and that changeover, Was that a hard thing for you at that time because you had so much experience? And again, it was like the work was so authentic and raw. And then you transitioned to where, yeah, you can do better, but it almost like was cheating in a way. Did you have a hard time with that transition, just personally?
Yeah, I mean, I see what you're saying. Yeah, it was there's so many layers to it, right? So film, slide film, the window of the exposure and all the lighting, it's really narrow, and you have to nail it. So you had to kind of have some previous talent or skill or technical skill to make that happen, right? Whereas these days with digital, I could, with respect to you, I could hand you a camera and say, okay, here's the settings. Just follow this guy and shoot some photos, and you'd get some good photos. And every time you hit the shutter button, it's not costing you money, you know. Whereas back in the day, every time you took a picture, it was money. So you had to really think about it and make sure that what you were shooting was gonna be good. So every shot you shot had to be somewhat decent, you know.
So I'm going to make a weird comparison. So you know how on doing a start at a Supercross, they didn't
No,
have the whole,
I don't know that. Okay.
you know what I mean? They didn't have
Yeah.
the whole shot devices. They didn't have this metal pad now. It's like now you can just set your bike wide open, drop the clutch. Where back in the
Yeah.
day, you had to have crazy timing, traction. Is
Yeah.
it something like that where again it was so fine-tuned before to where now you can miss a little, but you can make up for it in other ways where before it had to be just you had to nail it.
Yeah, for sure. So, you know, with digital, when you shoot a photo, you can either just shoot a JPEG, which is the camera takes your image and it processes the image in the camera, and basically what you get on your memory card when you stick it in a computer is what the camera thinks, right? It's like, okay, this is what it's supposed to look like. Or you can shoot raw files, which is like um, it's not a processed image. So you have to now process it in your camera, and that gives you so much more latitude and all that kind of stuff. But my point to that is like when I used to shoot slide film and you had to nail it. When I first started shoot digital, I just shoot JPEGs because I'm like, well, I've got it. You know, I used to shoot slides, so I can just, this would be good. But then when I started shooting raw, and you realize how much more flexibility there is, and you know, if you have a photo and you save it and then you save it again and you save it again, it's degraded every time. But with a raw image, you just output a JPEG and it, you know, that you've corrected for color or general look or feel, and it's pretty good.
All right, so I want to tell some stories now. I want to hear some stuff because you have seen and been a part of these epic photos, these for a long time too. So let's go back to the beginning, those early days, the early years when you're in Supercross. Just what comes to mind as something that stands out, something that happened that you were a part of, a photo that was used that was, you know, became iconic and special. I want to go back to those early years and just kind of bring those memories out.
Yeah, well, my first sort of experience with Supercross, like I said a little bit earlier, was I went to the Orlando Supercross and I was shooting for Renthal and Axo. Back in the day, Axo made the best gear. I mean, it was really good, high quality stuff, and they also had the distribution in the US for Renthal. So my buddy Todd Huffman, who has been in the industry for a long time, he used to be the marketing director at GT Bicycles, who I was working for, and he connected me with the Axo guys, and we went to the Orlando Supercross to shoot. And like 2 years before that, when I was working at GT, they used to do a Supercross ad every year in the Supercross program, and they would help Jeremy McGrath with bikes and all that kind of stuff. So the first time I met Jeremy, I had no idea who he was. I'm like, I wasn't into dirt bikes. I didn't grow up riding dirt bikes or anything. So this would be like 1993 possibly, and I didn't start riding until like 95. So the first time I met Jeremy, it was kind of cool because I'm sure everyone that used to meet him was like, oh, it's Jeremy McGrath. But for me, I'm like, hey, what's up? Like I don't know, you know? So we went out for the day and had fun, and we shot some photos, and the concept for the ad was like he'd ride his GT suspension bike, and then he'd ride his GT BMX bike, and then he was standing by his Honda, and he'd stand in there like this, like, which one am I going to ride today? You know, that kind of thing. So that always, I always remember that. And, meeting Jeremy again over the years, he's always been such a good guy. And, I remember going to, they used to have those races at Glen Helen, like New Year's Eve or something like that every year. And it was like a Supercross Invitational. And I went one day and I was shooting for Renthal, but I think he was still on a Suzuki or something, and it had pro taper bars. And he's like, he sees me coming over. He's like, "Hey, don't shoot these bars because I'm switching." And I'm like, and in my head, I'm like, "Aren't you concentrating on the race today? Like you're worried about what pictures I'm going to take of your handlebars?" So that I always thought that was pretty good. And then over the years, I was shooting a lot of stuff for Fox, and I used to go to Ricky's house a lot and shoot gear. And back in the day, it was like, "Hey, here's 3 sets of gear," and I'd get on the plane and fly to Florida, and Ricky was testing or training, and I just try and get photos throughout the day. And whereas these days a photo shoot like that is a big production, and they've got 3 video guys and a couple of photographers and all this extra stuff, because it seems like these days that the riders' time that they have to do that kind of stuff is much more limited, because they're training all the time, and they don't want to take a day off from that to do a photo shoot, so yeah, going to Ricky's house is always good fun. And that's where he was like, he'd have people come from town, like the local car dealer that he bought a car from or something. He's like, "Oh, come out to, bring your kids out." And they were into motocross, and they'd watch Ricky ride, and it was cool. And one day Ricky comes back into his building after a moto, and he's like, "Hey, how's your cousin?" He's talking to me. I'm like, "Who are you talking about?" He's like, "Phil Collins." I'm like, "Really, dude?" Like, and then his friends are like, "Is that really Phil Collins' cousin?" Like, it was just funny. So even to this day, like, a lot of people call me Phil just as a joke, So that's thanks to Ricky Carmichael. So thanks, Ricky, for that.
Yeah, thank you, Ricky. It sounds just about right.
Yeah, everyone's got a nickname, right?
In those years in the beginning, when you mentioned Fox and these different jobs that you're getting as you're growing, were you chasing them down, like going to them and trying to get work, or was your name building to where they started coming at you? Like when did it change from you looking for work, I guess, to the work coming at you, and now you just getting to start pick what you want to do?
Yeah, I mean, I was always, my job at GT was really good, and then they got bought out, and a lot of things changed. And at the same time, I'd been riding for a few years, and we'd go riding at local tracks in Southern California. And there was a downhill mountain bike girl called Tara Yanis who I used to ride moto with, and she was a mountain bike pro, and she was sponsored by Specialized. And there was a lady at Specialized called Sandy who my friend Tara used to talk to on the phone when we were driving out to the track to go ride. And I'd keep hearing about this person, Sandy. Well, eventually Sandy ended up working at Fox. And I called her one day and was like, "Hey, I'm Tara's friend. I shoot photos." And she's like, "Oh yeah, we've used you a bit." And I ended up striking up a deal with Fox, more of a retainer deal. So I owe a lot to Sandy Egger, and her husband Robert is this rocket scientist designer at Specialized Bikes. So they're really great people, and they really opened the door for me at Fox. And then, probably a bigger deal for me was when I met Eric Johnson, who used to work at Racer X. I think it was San Diego Supercross in '99. It was practice and like waiting for the guys to come out, and I'm just sort of sitting on a hay bale, and I didn't really know anyone back then, to be honest. I knew a few people, but I was sort of under the radar. And I went up to talk to Eric Johnson. I was like, "Hey, I'm Simon, and I'm a photographer." And he's like, "Oh, you should send us some stuff." And Racer X was just really starting in the print, the glossy print magazine. They'd been a newspaper before that. And so then I sent them some stuff, and I got the cover of the next issue with a graph photo. So working with Eric and then, Davey Coombs, it's been a game changer for me. I mean, it's changed my whole life. So I think having that, and Davey's such a larger than life influence in the industry, and having myself be associated with Racer X and Davey, it was almost like, well, if he's good enough to shoot for them, then he must be okay, you know. So that was a huge deal for me. Yeah, I mean, I've just been really lucky to be in the right place at the right time. And I'm pretty quiet, and I keep to myself unless I know someone, you know. So for me to go over that day and talk to Eric Johnson, waiting for practice, that was, I don't know, it's just one of those moments, and it kind of all went from that, you know.
When you look back on those times, and not only the things that you were shooting, but those relationships building, did you have any idea that you would follow this path, be this involved in the sport all these years later, and like your portfolio would grow, your relationships would grow? At that time, is that what you wanted? Is that what you were chasing? Or were you just doing it because you loved it and that stuff kind of happened naturally? Like, where were you at goal-wise back then?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of not good to say it, but I didn't really have any goals. I just wanted to work, and I have a classic photography training background, so I wasn't into motocross when I started being a photographer. You know, in the early '90s, I was assisting for some photographers in the LA area doing car brochure photography and that kind of stuff. And people ask me today, they're like, "Hey, how can I get a job being a motocross photographer?" And I'm like, "Well, learn to be a photographer, and then if you end up shooting motocross, then that's great. But don't bank on it, you know, because it's such a narrow field, you know." So my wife is from California, and that's where all the industry was, and that was by pure luck that we ended up settling there originally, you know. So I was just in the right place at the right time, and I met the right people and did the work, and it just sort of paid off in the end, you know.
I actually was just on your Instagram page today and yesterday. But the Travis Pastrana photo that you posted maybe 2 or 3 photos ago on Instagram, I remember that. And Travis is a little younger than me, so I've just followed Travis's career because he was timeline with me all the way from little kids. And when I see that photo, it kind of brings back some memories of him in the very beginning. You already talked about Jeremy, you talked about Ricky with the nickname, but as we get into like Travis and James, like they just had this like larger than life personality that just transcended outside of the sport. What was it like for you during that time when you were working with a Travis or a James Stewart? Because again, they're former superstars of this sport that had a little bit different vibe to them than anybody really since then. So what was those years like with Travis and James?
Yeah, well, you know, starting with Travis, I think my go-to story with Travis was I can't remember what year it was, but he went to do X Games in Philadelphia, and I think he was there on Thursday, for example, and then Friday we jumped on Eric Johnson and I were doing a story on Travis because he was going to go to X Games, then go to Millville, and then go back to X Games. Well, he did X Games later in the week, and then we flew on Friday down to Millville, and our flight was super delayed, so we ended up rolling into town at like 3:00 Saturday morning, and he went out to practice, I think, and then the race was Sunday, and like, he had some issues, like I think he pulled off and it wasn't good, and Roger DeCosta was the team manager, and nobody was happy, and it was a big drama. Well, then Travis got on the plane and flew back to Philly to do X Games, and I don't think that was good. And now the flight down that got super delayed, we were with Malcolm McCaskey because he was sort of Travis's guy, and it was just comedy on the plane. It's like 2:00 in the morning, and people are trying to sleep, and they're just like blah 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 blah. They were wide open. It was pretty funny. So that was good. And then I'm quite humbled by the fact that these days Travis, whenever I see him every year or two somewhere, he's like, "Hey man," you know, and I'm like, "Me? Like, okay." And it's pretty cool because I think he's a pure motocross guy that's obviously moved into all these other fields, but he remembers where he came from. And you know, I think he's you know, with Davey at Racer X and those guys, and Travis, it's always been a really good tight relationship, you know. And like Jeff Cernix as well, a big supporter of Travis, and he's tight with Davey, and you know, it's kind of a little circle there. So you know, like I say, every time I see Travis, he's like, "Hey man," you know, it's cool. That I'm like, I think it's neat. And then with James Stewart, you know, when I was shooting for Fox, the first time I met him, he was down at Muddy Creek. They had amateur races down at Muddy Creek, and I was given a bag of stuff, and I went down there for Fox to shoot some photos of this kid, you know, who was racing. And I hadn't shot him when he was younger at Loretta's or anything, so I'm assuming he was probably 14 or 15 maybe at this Muddy Creek race. And Mike Brown and Shea Bentley showed up on Saturday to practice, and the story goes they didn't come back on Sunday because James was there or something. Whether that's true or not, I don't know, but I met James and his parents, and they were in a old beat up Winnebago, and they're just making it happen, so over the years working for Fox, I was fortunate enough to go to James's house, shoot photos. I used to go with Beaker all the time, Chris Onstott, when he used to work for Fox. And you never knew how it was going to go. It was either going to be this awesome fun day, or if James was under pressure, and as he became more under pressure, as he got into the 450 class and he was coming back from injuries, and it became pretty tough, because I'm sure the poor guy had everyone wanting something from him, so we were just on that list of somebody that needed something from him that day. And I'm sure it was getting old at that point. And at the same time, Malcolm Stewart was there as well, and he was always a crack up. Like he was a little kid, and I think one day it was like drizzling with rain, so we weren't going to shoot for a little bit, and he's like, "Oh, let's go ride mini bikes." So we made a little mini bike track around the main track, and those are good memories for me, for sure. And James's parents, Big James and Sonia, they were always super nice, and it was good for sure.
I was asking about just the change and the transformation in your line of work, but we've seen the sport change also over the years, and kind of weave itself in and out of different models. When you get to like the Dungey Villapoto era, I feel like there was a major uptick in the seriousness. Those were both serious riders. Did you feel any kind of shift like that as the sport turned that way, just with the teams, the way they did things, the trainers more got involved? It just seemed like, I don't know the year, but there was some kind of a change with the way the whole thing kind of felt. Did you feel that on your end at all?
Yeah, I think so. Definitely sort of 2012, 2013, that was serious. But if you step back 10 years before that, with Ricky, when Ricky showed up at Anaheim one year, probably 02 or 03, I can't remember what it was, but he used to be Ricky, this bigger dude. And then he showed up and he was ripped. And you're just like, wow, that's like, what a transformation. You haven't seen him in 3 months, and he comes back and he's dropped all this weight and he's super fit. And I think, again, going back before that with Jeremy, he could win by talent. And maybe Ricky didn't have that kind of natural talent, but he was going to out-train everyone. So when you combine the natural talent that you had, plus this incredible training, all of a sudden everyone started training, and I think it became much more serious and maybe less fun. I mean, if you think about the stuff that McGrath and Emig and all those guys were doing, I mean, when I started riding, I could go ride at Paris, and Phil Lawrence would be out there riding, and he'd go past me and be like, woohoo! And, it was fun back then, but now you just don't see that, because everyone's in their own bike, little compounds.
They can't look over and
Yeah,
say
right.
anything because they're looking at the pit board, wondering if they beat their lap time for the 100th time.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So, yeah, I mean, it's definitely changed. And then I've been fortunate enough to, be friends with all of the riders, so I've kind of set it up so that, for example, Ryan Dungey, I think, I shoot the photos and I know he's going to be happy with them, but we try and keep it a little bit fun, like we do the team shoots. And I know the riders don't want to be there. They want to be training, or they want to be doing their motos or testing. And they've got to take this day to just ride and do photos. And we try and keep it fun. So, and Villapoto too, he's the super, you got the impression that he just wasn't happy over those years when he was winning everything. But I just think the pressure was just overwhelming. from the outside looking in, but like I could walk into the pits in the morning of the race and see him, and Mike Williamson was his mechanic, and everyone's all smiles. Hey, what's up? Hey, you know, it's all good. But like you say, the pressure as the day actually wore on and then stuff started getting more serious, then it was not the night show. Yeah, you could definitely see it was taking a toll on those guys for sure.
I know something I've heard over this last week, just with the fans, you know, either on a YouTube comment or on Instagram, they're dying to know things that they see but don't understand. You know, that even the track and the semi trucks, they see it from the outside, but they don't understand it. I got a question for you that is from a fan's perspective, because I want to know, when you go to do a photo shoot for KTM or Husky, and you know it's the day, right? It's, you know, the weather's right, it's the day, they're all there. How does the process work from beginning to end? I mean, do you show up early? Do you have a plan in place of what you want to do? Do they tell you what they're looking for? Just kind of take me through those days, because we see the finished product, but we don't really understand how that all happened. So kind of take me through a photo shoot day, say for KTM or Husky.
Yeah, that's a good question. So, you know, we'll book. I'll call the team, my contacts at the team, say, okay, you know, what dates are you looking at? And then we'll get a tentative date going, because they have to check with when the riders are going to be in town, when the bike's going to be ready, when the sponsorship package is correct and the graphics are right, and all these things that bring us up to that point. And also at the same time, like the riders are testing and practicing and training the whole time. So once we finally get the day penciled in, and we know where we're going to shoot, you know, we end up KTM, for example, they have their new Supercross track right next to their facility, and they want to shoot there because it's close. It's not the best for photos because there's houses around and some other stuff around there, you know. But so, you know, all of a sudden it's a compromise on our end, because we've got like, okay, I've got to make this look good, you know. So we'll get there early. We'll start off with a lot of static photos, you know, because we always try and minimize the amount of time the rider is actually there. So there's all this other stuff we have to do, like all the different angles of the bikes and some close-ups of products and all that kind of stuff on the bike, like details for team sponsors. So we'll shoot all that stuff, and then the riders will show up, and you know, let's say we got there at 7 or 7:30, do all this other stuff. The riders get there about 9, get their gear on. Then we'll start doing the static shots of the rider behind the bike and the rider holding different sponsor stuff like a Motorex can or a sprocket or something like that sponsors have requested. And then headshots and all that kind of stuff. So when it's a team like KTM where there's only 3 riders, that stuff goes pretty smooth. But when you get to a team like Husqvarna, and this year they have 6 riders, that's twice as much stuff. So, and you know, they want multiple. If you think you want multiple angles of the bike, you multiply that by 6. So, you know, all of a sudden that's a lot of shots and a lot of setups. And we bring lighting and we try and make it as professional looking as we can, you know. So then you get to about lunchtime, and you know the riders are already over it because they've been there for 3 or 4 hours. And after lunch, usually try and go ride. You know, we'll set up our lights and that kind of stuff to make these photos pop a little bit more than just shooting it without any strobes. And that was a big deal for me, like learning how to do all that stuff. And again, I had like a technical background, so I understand how it all works, but it doesn't work properly all the time. So that's another layer of stress. You know, you've got these guys sitting there waiting to hit the finish line jump, and you're like, hang on a sec, I got to fix this. And it's stressful, you know. And this year it was actually good with the Husqvarna team because we did all of the static shots and we finished with those about 2 o'clock. So it was a lot of stuff that we had to do. And then we had to do some riding. So because of the location of that track and the surroundings with houses and miscellaneous other stuff around, we said, okay, let's just shoot this finish line jump. And then the day after, we'll go out for a half day out to Cheney Ranch, which is an outdoor motocross track in California that's really pretty, and there's trees and some good jumps there. And let's do a few jumps there, but also do some turn shots where the berms are blowing up and there's dirt flying. because we get requests from that from KTM and Husky and Gas in Austria, and then we end up shooting at the Supercross track, and that kind of doesn't exist, you know. So it was good this year with Husky because we went to 2 locations, and that really helped a lot. And it got the guys out of there a little bit earlier the first day, and then they came out to ride the second day. And once we were finished shooting, they went and rode the track and had some fun. So that was good. But it's definitely stressful because it's like you can't mess it up, you know. It has to be good, and you have to get it right, and it has to go smoothly. And you know, you want everyone to, at the end of the day, go, yeah, that wasn't so bad, you know. Let's use Simon again next year. So, and I have a photo assistant in California, Spencer Owens. He's a young kid who I'm trying to help out, and he's trying to break into the industry, and he's done some work for companies already. And you know, he's young. Like, I just turned 55, so I'm like starting to go, man, I'm getting old. Spencer's like 23, and I'm like, dude, you're like, you got so many years ahead of you. So trying to help him out, and he's been huge for helping me out. And I rely on him heavily on those days as well. Like, hey, move this stuff over there. We're going to do this next. And he's over the photo shoots. He's become almost like he already knows what we're going to do next, and he's already halfway to setting it up. You know, so that's been really good for me.
When you are getting ready to send the files and send everything over to Husqvarna or Racer X or Fox or whoever it is, do you go through every single one, and are you happy with everything you're sending? Or have you ever had a situation where you send something, they use it, and you're like, oh, I don't like that one, or you know what I mean? Like that you got to hand it off, and there's decisions made. But when you hand it off, are you like, everything I'm giving you, I am stoked on? Or have you ever had something like that happen?
Yeah, well, at the races, it's different than a team photo shoot, for example. So the team photo shoot, you know, you're dealing with a lot of parameters, like the person choosing I don't choose the photos. I give them stuff that I'm like, okay, yeah, this works, and I send it, you know. So there'll be a big batch of photos that at the end are like, yeah, okay, we can use these. And I have to tell the riders when I'm shooting, I'm like, hey, this next shot, it's not going to be, you know, gnarly or rad. It's going to be like, I just need to go off the side of this jump and do this, you know. And they're like, this is stupid. And then they see the photos and like, oh yeah, that works pretty good. So at those shoots, we're trying to give a variety of shots, you know what I mean? And sometimes, like, you'll see, I've had some riders come to me, I'm like, man, that poster photo you shot me last year, I didn't like it. Well, I'm like, well, I didn't choose it. I just sent a big batch, and then somebody at the company that, you know, chose it because they might be able to, you know, it might be a whip shot. And I tend to shoot riders not like fully flat, but like as they drop in, so you can see the side of the bike, and you can see the graphics and the logos, and everyone wants to see that, the sponsors. So there might have been a shot where, hey, the bike looks good, but the photo's average. But I send it anyway because I know somebody might need a shot like that, you know. So it's challenging. And then at the races, you go through stuff so quickly that, yeah, some stuff slips through the cracks here and there. But you know, I think you'll see a photo that somebody might shoot and go, man, that photo's awesome. But from a business standpoint, if you look at that photo, you don't know how many photos they shot that were like that or weren't very good. I mean, I've worked with some people, and you're like, man, that photo's great, and then they shoot with you, and you're like, I didn't get enough stuff, you know. So everything you shoot, it goes back to that sort of thing I talk about with some people sometimes, like pre-visualizing the photo. Like, I'm not just out there shooting whatever moves. I'm going, okay, yeah, this shot right here, yeah, that works, so I'm going to shoot it, you know. But you know, I turn over here, I'm like, nah, that doesn't work, so I don't shoot it, you know, because I know it's going to be more time on the back end editing that or deleting it or whatever. So you become really good at narrowing down exactly what you're going to shoot into this little window of stuff in my mind that I think, okay, yeah, that works, that's acceptable, you know.
I was just curious because I would imagine that, I mean, you look at your own work and you're picky because you like what you like. And I'm wondering if anything ever came out and you're like, why? Like, you know, I would just imagine that had to have happened at some point. But I'm going to flip the same kind of question and go the other way now. And I know we're getting near the end of this thing, and so maybe throw a couple scenarios. But of all the things you've done, the cover shots, the rider, the team, but just give me a few that stand out when you look at that picture and you look at that shot and you go, man, I'm so pumped I got that one. I'm so pumped that one made it where it made it. Just some of those iconic photos that have lasted that you look back on and go, I'm so pumped that my name's on that one. I got that shot.
I think for me, I don't really think about that stuff, but now that you're talking about it, one of the first things that popped in my head was I went to Motocross of Nations with Davey Coombs and the whole team in 2005 to Ernay in France. And we'd had such a good few days traveling around before the race started. We all got there sort of Tuesday. So we spent Wednesday and Thursday driving around, and we went to the beaches of Normandy, and we went to Mont Saint-Michel, which is this little island on the coast of the north of France that you can walk across a causeway. I mean, it was just this really cool trip, and everyone on there on the trip was good. And it was Ricky, and then Ivan Tedesco, Kevin Windham, and I feel lucky that I was able to be friends with all those guys, and Mitch Payton, and some of the Suzuki guys were over there, and it was just this great trip. So qualifying was the first day, I think it was, and it was raining and muddy, and it was just, I was like, man, these photos, they're okay, but I'm not stoked. On the second day, the sun was out, and looked like 1 million people on the side of this hill watching this race. And, the Team USA won it, and Ricky and Kevin and Ivan, I mean, the track was crazy. I was standing at the top of some of the hills and come around this turn and step down this big ski jump thing, and I'm standing at the top of this going like, how is that even possible? So I was looking at this track, and it was in this basin, and again, there was looked like millions of people there. Well, the team won, and at that point in the US, like I was shooting Supercross and I was shooting outdoor motocross, but there's different officials and different system over there in Europe. So I didn't really know anyone. And somehow I was up next to the podium, and Scott Taylor, who used to work for Fox, he was over there helping Ricky. And the team went up the little ramp onto the podium in front of all these people, and all the other photographers are like down below there. And Scott's like, hey, come on. So I like went up there. I'm like, I know I'm not supposed to be here, but I was up there. And then I got this photo of Ricky, fist pump in the air, looking back towards me, and you've got this sea of people behind, and he had the American flag and that. And I don't know, I just remember that trip and the group of photos that I got there as being a really good trip. And then there's the dark side of it too, where after the race, you're in the Alpine Stars hospitality rig with all the team, and everyone's having a few beverages, and we had to drive back to Paris. And I can remember back then my laptop was slow and the files were big, and we had to stop at this gas station, and I plugged my laptop in, and we unplugged the salad bar so that I could charge my computer. So I was like, just stupid stuff like that. And then we got back that night, and I had to, the internet was slow, the files were huge, I had to try and send them that night to Racer X in the US. And so I just hit send and went to sleep, and then the next morning I got up and the photos had sent, and it was good. So yeah, so I think that's one of my favorite trips I've ever been on, and I feel like the photos that I shot there, I was really happy with that trip for sure.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, I have to imagine that, again, the photos that stand out in your own memory will have a story attached to them. Again, if you're putting out work that you're proud of for so many different ways, and unless there's a story behind that can really give it some meaning, I could see how some will rise to the top based on what happened, why it happened, how it happened. Because a picture, I mean, it tells a story. And if you know the story behind the photo, I can imagine why that would stand out and kind of rise to the top.
Yeah, it's been I've been really lucky, and again, I owe a lot to a lot of people I've met along the way, and I really appreciate the support of Davey Coombs and his family and Racer X, and you know, all the officials and all the riders. I mean, I don't know, man. I've been lucky for sure. I've been in the right place at the right time and done the work, and it's paid off.
Awesome, Simon. Thanks for your time today. I've been looking forward to this one. I'm glad we got it done. And man, great stories and some information again on the technical side that I didn't know, and I know a lot of people are curious about. I think we're at a time where people want to understand the things that they enjoy. Obviously, they love your photos, and now we have a better understanding and idea of how they become what they become. So thanks again for joining me on Beyond the Track, and I look forward to seeing you on Saturday.
Yeah, I'll see you out there. Thanks a lot, everyone, and I really appreciate the support over the years.